Something's missing. I need more frames. That's better. Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your screen. And no, you're not watching the latest Avatar movie. Today, we're talking about one of the stickiest subjects when it comes to motion on TVs, motion interpolation. It goes by many names: true motion, motion flow, auto motion plus. But you might know it best as that nagging feeling that something looks off when you watch TV at your parents' place. But turn it off completely and you reintroduce a different problem: stutter. We've come a long way since projectors like this were the norm. So why is it that these incredibly bright, fast, and powerful TVs have to choose between stutter or soap opera? And is there a good middle ground? Well, we totally revamped how we test stutter on TVs and came up with a new way to measure the effectiveness of motion smoothing so that you can more easily figure that out for yourself. There have always been trade-offs when it comes to motion on displays, and it all stems from one simple fact. Motion on a screen is just a series of static frames shown one after another. Your brain fills in the gaps, and that's how we get the illusion of movement. But everything from how the content was shot to how those frames are displayed can impact your perception of motion. That's what makes it so complicated, and why it took us over a year of research to get here. Older display technologies like film projectors, CRTs, and plasma TVs work differently than TVs today. The key thing that differentiates modern TVs is that they use a technique called sample and hold, where each frame is held on screen continuously until it's time to draw the next frame. Because CRTs and plasmas illuminate each pixel for just a fraction of a second, the frame isn't held static for nearly as long as modern TVs. The frames are naturally broken up, which helps your eye transition between frames more smoothly. However, because of sample and hold, we now have to contend with two different effects that impact our perception of motion. The first is persistence blur. When our eyes track a moving object on screen, our brain expects it to move continuously, as it would in real life. But on a display, the object jumps from one point to another across one frame to the next. The eye tracks continuously, but the object on screen doesn't, creating a smearing effect. It's similar to how a camera works. If you take a photo of a static object while moving the camera, the object will look blurry. And if you adjust the shutter speed on your camera, you're effectively adjusting the level of persistence blur. This is analogous to adjusting the frame rate on a display. In both cases, the length of time that the frame is static changes, leading to more or less persistence. The longer the shutter is open, the more blur you get, just as the longer the frame is held on screen, the more blur you'll see. OLEDs are great for actually seeing how persistence blur appears since they have near instantaneous response times, meaning the only blur you see here comes from persistence rather than slow pixel transitions. As you can see, the lower the frame rate, the blurrier the image. Meanwhile, at higher frame rates, motion looks smoother because there are more frames for your brain to interpret. But there's a second effect that comes from displaying low frame rates on sample and hold displays. When a frame stays on screen for too long, it can create a jarring effect in which moving objects appear to jump from one frame to the next. This is what we call stutter, and it's most perceptible in scenes with slow panning shots, or objects moving from side to side, like this scene from the movie Red. On a perceptual level, stutter appears as a dynamic effect that makes it look like both sides of the object are flickering. This is where modern TVs actually make things worse. With OLEDs, stutter is as bad as it gets, thanks to their instantaneous response times, which makes the jumps between each frame more noticeable. TVs with slower response times, like early LCDs, effectively blurred those steps together, reducing stutter. The downside, of course, was more blur on higher frame rate content like sports and video games. If you want to learn a bit more about the actual mechanics of stutter and how it differs from judder, check out our previous video here. So, if the problem is that there aren't enough frames, why not just add more? Well, that's exactly what motion interpolation does. Let's say you're watching something at 24 frames per second. When you turn on motion interpolation, your TV analyzes the content and generates new frames to fill in the gaps and effectively translate 24 FPS into higher frame rates. The result is smoother, more fluid motion. But because the TV is just making its best guess to generate information that isn't originally there, it can also lead to artifacts. On top of that, it changes the look of the content, often against the creator's intent.
This is sometimes referred to as the soap opera effect.
If you are used to cinematic content, it can make everything feel, well, a bit like this.
I know what you did.
What are you talking about?
You turned on motion smoothing on my TV.
You were right. It was me, your long-lost twin brother. Clearly, motion smoothing is divisive. So we asked you directly how you use it. Most people said they prefer to enable a small amount of motion interpolation to mitigate stutter. Until now, we didn't really have an objective way to measure how effectively interpolation actually is at reducing stutter, so we got to work. First, we revamped how we measure stutter itself. Instead of calculating the frame hold time as the inverse of a TV's response time, our updated test also looks at how much a TV's motion deviates from continuous motion as a result of sample and hold. We use a high-speed camera to record this 24p video displayed on each TV. Then we measure the position of the green ball as it moves across the screen to show how it deviates from the reference trajectory. With this new methodology, we can now also measure how good the TV is at reducing stutter via motion interpolation. And as you can see on these graphs, we have so many graphs, guys, so many graphs. It reduces the deviation from that line. On most TVs, this feature is called de-judder, not to be confused with the setting that actually removes judder. There will usually be a range of settings, typically from 1 to 10, but it varies from brand to brand. You might expect the different settings to generate different amounts of frames, but they don't. The number of newly generated frames always stays the same. What changes is the spacing between those frames. When you set motion interpolation to max, every frame is equally spaced, so the new frames are generated at even intervals to effectively translate 24 FPS into, usually, 120 FPS. For our purposes, we decided to test interpolation at a balanced setting that can reduce stutter without introducing too much soap opera effect. So we set the TV to output an approximate 30 FPS signal and repeat the same process for our sample and hold test. Some TVs, like the QM8K, add interpolated frames close to the original ones, making motion look very fluid. Others, like the LG G5, distribute those frames differently, adding 2 frames on each side of the original frame. The result is less aggressive smoothing. You'll still see some stutter, but it doesn't fully tip over into soap opera territory. If you're especially sensitive to stutter, you'll probably want to avoid OLEDs entirely. But most LCD TVs today will still have some degree of stutter, because response times have continued to get faster and faster. The only way to avoid it is to go back to plasma or CRT. Every TV implements things a little differently. Some are very effective at removing stutter, others aren't. Some have a ton of artifacts and others don't. That's why it's important to actually tune these settings, so you can find the right balance between reducing stutter, avoiding artifacts, and staying true to the intent of the content you're watching. Love it or hate it, motion interpolation is one of the few tools we have to actually reduce stutter. Well, aside from black frame insertion, which tries to emulate the look of old film projectors. But that's a whole other can of worms. So if you want to learn more about BFI, let us know in the comments. The only way you can find your own preference for these settings is by playing around with them. Try out different levels of interpolation and see what feels right for you. After all, there's no perfect motion, only different trade-offs. But once you understand those trade-offs, you can figure out what works best for your needs. And if you still think this video looks a little too smooth, well, there's only one thing to do.